Hi everyone, this is Katie from Moonflower Moments. Today I'm going to do a riff on the question of if you only have 5 tarot decks that you can sing from a fire, which ones would you choose? So I think that this question strikes a lot of fear into people's hearts, not necessarily because people are materialistic or because they've spent so much money on their deck collections, though both of those are definitely true and definitely possibilities as well. But I think that everyone who has a larger collection or even, just owns more than, like, let's say, for example, 5 tarot decks, understands that decks naturally slot into specific purposes and specific practices. And sometimes it's hard to imagine what your practice would be like without those decks in it. And so what I wanted to do is walk you through the process of me only having 5 decks. So the way that I chose these decks randomly is usually about once a month I shuffle all of my decks. And last night when I was shuffling, I looked down and I only had 5 decks left. And I thought to myself, wow, if these were the only 5 decks that I had left, what would my practice look like? Would I feel like I'm able to do everything that are, a part of my normal routine? Or would I feel like I was being stifled? What kind of practices would I naturally gravitate towards to, and what practices would fall to the wayside because the tools aren't exactly right for it? And so I guess that what I'm trying to say is looking at those 5 decks really made me think about other decks in my past that may have fallen to the wayside, as my collection got larger. So one of them in particular that fell to the wayside for sure, and a practice that I no longer do anymore because my collection got so big, was the Goddess Tarot. So I pulled this was actually the 6th to last deck that I was shuffling last night, and I think it's really its presence and also how I used to use it that made me think of this particular video and gave me the idea for it. So this is the Goddess Tarot, and I love the Goddess Tarot so much. It is definitely probably the most overlooked deck in my collection. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if it made it into my overlooked decks video. It might have. I don't know. I'll leave it below. But that being said, it is one of the decks that I use specifically for predictive readings. And so when I was first learning tarot, one of the ways that I got used to the cards and really spent more time learning them was by doing a weekly reading every week. And I had about 5 to 6 different spread positions, and it was my favorite part of the week. And I always use Goddess Tarot. I also used this deck a lot when I was traveling, because at that time I was traveling a lot between Louisiana and Alabama, Louisiana, and I like that it didn't have any nudity. It is a clean deck, so I was able to use it for those purposes. So it definitely fit 2 very specific roles for me, but the one that I want to highlight is the one that was part of my practice, which was predictive style reading. When my collection grew, I think I got to about 20 decks, I just stopped doing those readings. And it was because perhaps because I felt like I had a great enough grasp of the tarot to where I didn't need to do that anymore to learn the cards, but also because new decks came in and new practices got started, and you can't do everything at once, and so some stuff fell to the wayside. So I guess you could say that the Goddess Tarot is what inspired this mostly. So my 5 to last decks that I was shuffling, so these are the ones that essentially were like a random selection from my deck, were these. So the first would be Druidcraft, and I keep it in the same basket as my Druid Oracle, and this is like my Druid Plant and Oracle. I know that's 2 oracles, but I keep them together, so I'm gonna go ahead and count them as one because I never separate them. Another one was Illusory, which from my previous videos, if you've watched any of these, this is a very important deck to me, so I would have been very happy if this was one of my last 5. And then I have some other ones too. So I have Story Through Stone, which these are pictures of natural stones that Sindera Quackenbush, her father and her grandfather, had collected over the years working in a national park. So I use that deck a lot. I was pretty happy to see that. If that's one of my last 5, I'd be probably okay. And then also the Shakespeare Oracle. So these are some chonkers of a deck. I'm going to try my best to keep them in the frame, but it might get a little bit cluttered as we go. Okay. So naturally, I'm going to talk about what kind of decks are in my practice to begin with. So I typically enjoy decks that are nature-based. I also enjoy decks that are historic, and I also enjoy decks that are pip style. I really love pip style decks. And so for that reason, I think we have some of that represented here. In terms of my natural tarot practice in general, the kind of work that I do, I love to do ancestor work, though I don't do it as often as I would love. I love to communicate with like the spirits of place, whether that be like the house, the dwelling that I'm in, or the trees and the plants around me. Those are the two main practices that I participate in. I do dabble a little bit into like, I'd say like bibliomancy, in the sense that I use books I flip open a book essentially to a specific page, and I use words from that page as inspiration on how to create spreads. So I guess it's like my own like form of bibliomancy. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that like really is major that I wouldn't want to leave out. I don't know. I think that there's going to be more. As we talk through this, there's going to be more, because my practice is definitely more than just like 3 bits. Oh, and I guess herbalism too. Herbalism is naturally part of my practice as well. Okay, so let's see what we have for here. So if this is what I'm titling like a sample from my collection and a reflection of that, how well would these 5 decks own up? You know, how well would they do? Would I want more? And so I'm going to start with the Druidcraft. So let me scoot some decks all around. It is difficult to fit them all into the frame. They're big decks. It's just funny that those were the ones that were left. So the Druidcraft Tarot. This was one of the first decks that I ever bought. I really love how it is based in nature. So I think it definitely checks that balance of me needing a deck that is nature-based. I like how it's an everyday RWS clone. I feel like that it can be used in a lot of different ways because of that. I feel like it has a lot of applications because of that. And so in general, it could be a very strong generic reader. Yeah, I like that a lot. Another one that I have here is the Druid Plant and Animal Oracle. So this one fits very well within my herbalism practice. So the deck itself has information in the guidebook about the various herbs, especially with the Plant Oracle. Like I said, the plant and animal are mixed in. I like that the animal is here as well, because I think that that gives me a full range. I really have the plants, I have the animals, and then with the Druidcraft Tarot, I have the humans. So I could do some sort of, I like to do metaphor spreads to where I essentially sit down and I list various places of the forest, and I try to sense what these various places are trying to tell me. And so while that's a practice I haven't done in a while, it is one that I did a lot when I had a lot more like nature decks. And so I feel like if my collection was pared back and this was the only nature oracle that I had, I feel like with the natural structure of it, I'd probably pick up that practice again. Now, I did say that I like to engage in like bibliomancy, in the sense of I do it in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if it's proper bibliomancy, but it's my version of it, to where I open up books and I use words to figure out spreads, but I also use like fairy tales and also like nursery rhymes as inspiration for making spreads. And I think that the Shakespeare Tarot would really work well for that. Specifically because though it has pips, the pips have quotes on them. So I think that that would allow me the space to dip into that. I am an English teacher by trade, and so I enjoy things that have words in it. I enjoyed reading quotes and really ruminating on that. And so I think that like who we are as people naturally influences our practice, and our practice influences who we are as people, vice versa. And so I think that this would fill that English teacher in me. I really enjoy having very intuitive reads. Sometimes I'm in the mood for like a basic RWS clone, and other times I'm in the mood to sink my teeth into the images and visually analyze decks that are completely different from just a plain RWS clone. And so I think if Illusory was in my 5 decks, and the only 5 decks that I could ever have, I think that this would be a great one to have. I also use this deck for a very specific purpose. I use it to communicate with my house. So in particular, I use it to feel the energy of the house around me. And so that's not a practice that I regularly engage in. I probably only do it maybe once every 6 months or whenever I feel a need to, you know, such as before I'm about to like start a renovation project or about to make a big investment into the house. But I think that if this was one of my 5 decks that I had, and my only 5 decks that I had, I feel like I would engage in that practice a lot more. So I'd be pretty happy to have this specifically for that intuitive read, but also for that communing with the spirits of place part of my practice. Now, in terms of my ancestor work, Story Through Stones is one of my favorite decks to use with that. I don't use it near enough. It's definitely one of my overlooked decks. I enjoy Story Through Stones because, like I had mentioned, this is natural rock. And so these are images of natural rock. I don't like to use decks like, say for example, like Vintage Wisdom for ancestor work. I've looked at it online. I might feel different when I had it on my hands, but I don't like decks that have words like doctor and lawyer and failed aspirations and loyalty and things like that, because sometimes when I want to commune with the ancestors, I feel like it's necessary for me to go a little further back. I don't want to just commune with people that are just 1 or 2 generations or even 5 generations away from me. I want to commune with people from societies and from lines that might not recognize the same societal structures that we do. And so the fact that this doesn't have a guidebook or guide words really makes it something that is well suited for ancestor work, because I think that it is limitless in its structure and limitless in its potential. So I think that the 5 decks that were randomly left last night when I was shuffling, I do think that they would be pretty good representations of my practice. While there would be some things that are missing, I think that most would be there. Another thing that I mentioned is that I like to engage in like childhood work. So I do like to engage in like inner child work, and I'm looking at my desk right now and trying to see if any of these would be really well suited for that. Oh, sorry, y'all, that's my dog. He's like 13, so just let him be. He won't like leave me alone. He has to be in the recording room, so I think it's a good thing. You know, he's 13. He gets to do what he wants. So I think that if I had these 5 decks, I'd probably be okay, but I probably would want to add a few more, just because I feel like with this base, like there are some things that are noticeably missing. So I know for a fact, like I said, I'm missing like a child work deck, like a childhood deck for inner child work. I think also I would want to have a deck that was more pip style, because the Shakespeare Oracle does have pips, but I don't look at the pips here and read the pips. Like those are pretty much like a background story. What I'm really looking at is the quotes. And so I think I need something where the pips are like front and center for me to feel like I'm, you know, sinking my teeth into that like really intuitive part of my practice. So with that being said, I'm gonna add 3 more decks. These would be the 3 decks that would really round out my collection. So that would bring this table to 8. So I think one of them that I would have to bring in would be my Terra. This is my soul deck. So I really try to grab this not because, like the point of this exercise is not just like, you know, the decks that I would have to have, but like it's the decks that I feel like I need in order for my practice to be well-rounded. And sometimes like those decks are the same. But I really want to emphasize to you that the reason that I would want to grab this in particular is because of the way that the pips are structured. So for example, the 4 of Swords, okay? So we have these 4 air plants coming together at a point. And so when I think of like 4 sharp, spiky things coming at a point, I think of like the tension that is within that point. And so I think of someone like whose body is very tense and they need that rest. And so this is typically how I use the pips, is I look at how the pips are arranged like in direction with one another, how they're facing one another. If they're facing away, how are they looking with other cards? And I don't think that I could do that with any other deck that is on this table. I'm also someone who likes to engage in like garden metaphor spreads. The way that plants and animals work really speaks to me. I think that I could do that with the Druid plant and animal oracle, but you have to use the guidebook so much for that deck. And so sometimes it's like, I really feel like the Druid plant and animal oracle, the guidebook is speaking to you rather than the artwork. But I feel like with this particular deck, the artwork itself is speaking to you. And so I think I would want this as well. I also am an incredibly seasonal reader. So I like to read in reference to my seasons. So that being said, Druidcraft is a bit of a difficult deck for me because while I love it, I only use it maybe like probably like every January or every February because of the light colors. I feel like this is like so pared back that ultimately I would want something with like richer, vibrant colors to match the weather of Louisiana. And nothing here really has that rich greenery. So I'm going to say, let's add a couple more decks and see how we go. So this would be one of my like 8. I'm trying to keep myself limited. This is the Greenwich Tarot. Like I was saying, that I am someone who reads with the seasons. And so I think that I would have to have the Greenwich Tarot because it really does represent fall, and especially like summer, late summer, when everything is in bloom, when things are being harvested. And I think that because Louisiana is so hot, our harvest season starts much earlier than most people. So for example, my sister has a garden right now and she's already like harvesting tomatoes. My dad is harvesting cucumbers. And so I think that because of this deck like represents like a lot of harvest scenes, it naturally fits in well with the weather of this environment. And so I would want this deck to represent those seasonal energies. Okay, let's see if I can fit more decks here. We're gonna have to start layering. Okay, another thing that I mentioned that is an essential practice to me is that I love a good deck study. So it's pretty important to me that I get to sink my teeth into a deck and that I really get to study it for a long-term time. So if I need a deck in particular to study, I think that the one that immediately comes to mind is going to have to be Spirit Keepers. So Spirit Keepers Tarot, this is created by Benabel Wynn. Ooh, I have like an avalanche of decks here. Okay, so this is created by Benabel Wynn. And it comes with, well, it doesn't come with, you can buy a separate workbook and a separate guidebook that is massive. I mean, over 1,000 pages. Massive. And so I think that this deck has a lot of study potential. Unfortunately, since I bought the deck and since I bought the book, I haven't cracked open the guidebook, the big guidebook, like the 1,000-page guidebook, or the workbook one time. I think part of that is when I bought this deck, I had a bunch of other decks come in. So this is a really great example of how sometimes when you have a lot of things come in at once, some of the practices you really enjoy, such as very detailed, intensive studies that I know I love to do, they just fall to the wayside. But if I only had, I believe this is here like 8 decks. I mean, out of the ones that are on my desk, I think that this would be the best one to study, and it would be one that I would be able to study for a really long time. So I think that, you know, looking around, I think that these 8 are a pretty good representation of what I would want in my practice. We do have like historic, we have intuitive, we have late summer, and even like late fall and spring greenery. You have plants, you have animals, you have pips with some more plants, you have a little bit of winter energy here, you have ancestor energy here, you have my bibliomancy practice here, my study practice here. I'm trying to look and see what else I would need. Yeah, I'm gonna have 2 runner-ups. I think that everything that is on this table could do what I'm about to mention, but I think that I would crave these 2 decks for their capacity to do their described roles. So I'm looking at all of these decks, and Green Witch can be a little bit playful when she wants to be. I use her for, like I mentioned before, like inner child work, but I would want something for like the sheer joy of being a child. And so I think that I would add my Neopets Tarot into it. So I thought when I bought this deck that I was going to be able to do lighthearted readings with this, that I was going to be able to really just have fun, play, maybe, I don't know, watch Love is Blind and use this deck to like predict who's going to marry who, like just watch like some trash TV and do some divination for fun. You know, I've heard of other people doing that. I tried to do that with the Neopets Tarot. It did not work. Like, this deck wants to be read seriously. But with that being said, somehow when I use this deck to work through like inner childhood problems, because of the nostalgia of this imagery, because of these cute creatures, it doesn't hit as hard as the Green Witch does. And so I would think I would want this as a little bit of a lighthearted break. I also like to have a clear RWS, you know, just give me the answer straight for questions that are really complicated. And while I think that I do have another clear RWS, which is the Druid Craft here, I would probably want this Neopets Tarot as another option. You know, not all the time do you want the greenery. Sometimes you want the silly as well. But on the flip side of this, I'm looking at this, and there's nothing really on this table that I use for heavy shadow work. And I don't engage with shadow work as much as the other practices I've listed, which is probably why this one is listed as number 10 and it would be considered a runner-up for me. I think that I would want to add Somnia, and I think that this would really truly balance everything out. So Somnia, of course, is an RWS clone for the most part, but there's something about this deck which makes it intuitively very shadowy. So the King of Cups, for example, we can see that he has water that's being poured on his head, so he's directly connected to the emotions of those around him, but he has this collar around his neck, so it's almost as if he is trapped. It's almost as if he is suffocating by all of these emotions. You know, we have Strength here. She's trying to pry open this bear trap, but in the process she could really cut open her fingers. She's almost given up in defeat, unlike the Strength card that we typically see, which is brave and fierce and courageous. So even though I don't engage with shadow work often, I say that, but I think we all engage with shadow work. It's just not intentional, right? Like, any spread can be a shadowy spread. I don't sit down and engage with like intentional shadow work often. I'd want to have this deck for those situations that would cut, for those situations where I would want to be cut so that I could heal. I could also say Barbara Walker for this, but I've been talking about her a lot, so I think Somnia would be the ones. Yeah, so to recap, I think that I have 10 decks here. I'm not even sure if you can see all of them. We have a whole avalanche of decks here, but these would be the ones that, if I had to expand upon my original 5, those would be the 5 that really match my practice and, you know, what I do into a day-to-day capacity. So like I said, I really try to take time not to think about like what my top 10 are, right? I mean, we took the 5 random anyway, so I guess like the 5 really wouldn't be a part of your top 10, though they could be, like if you know, it just happened to be that way. And then like the ones that I added, those weren't necessarily like my favorite decks in my collection. Like, I would say that Somnia is, out of like my collection of about 65, Somnia is probably listed like in the 50s. But I know that it does a job for me that nothing else does. It's just a practice that I don't engage with often, so I would want to include it on this table. So it's less about, you know, this video is less about, and this practice is less about, you know, picking your favorites, and more about asking yourself, what are things that you're doing, what are habits that you're engaging in and patterns that you're engaging in, and, you know, what are the kind of things that you would want to continue, and what are the kind of things that you feel like could be swept aside in favor for other practices. So with that being said, this was Moonflower Moments. Thank you so much as I went through this process. I really appreciate it. If I haven't said it before, I think I'm going to call this a sample from my collection reflection, because that's what it is, right? We took a sample of decks, we looked at it, how they relate to my collection, and when we reflected on them. So the next time you sit down and you decide to randomly grab 5 decks, or maybe you're like me and you like obsessively shuffle to cleanse the energy, or maybe you just have 5 that randomly fall out of your bag, you know, ask yourself, like, would these 5 decks do for me everything that I need to have done? And like I said, I know that we only technically need 1 deck in order to be engaged, but there are certain tools that are well aligned to certain practices. So that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope that y'all have a great night. And if you enjoyed this video, please like leave a comment or please subscribe. I really enjoyed my time being here on YouTube, and I look forward to making more content like this. Thanks.